The morning frost clung to the wooden fence posts like scattered diamonds when Sarah Chun stepped off the military transport bus at Fort Braxton Advanced Marksmanship Academy. At 28 years old, she carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who had learned to navigate a world that consistently underestimated her capabilities. Her duffel bag contained everything she owned that mattered: precision shooting manuals worn soft from countless readings, a collection of ballistics charts covered in her own handwritten calculations, and a photograph of her late grandfather, teaching her to shoot tin cans off fence posts when she was barely tall enough to hold his hunting rifle steady. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Sarah had spent the last 6 years working as a civilian firearms instructor at a small-town shooting range, where her ability to place 5 consecutive shots through a quarter-sized target at 300 yards had earned her a reputation that extended far beyond the county limits. When the military opened its elite sniper training program to civilian contractors for the first time in 20 years, Sarah's application had been one of only 12 accepted out of nearly 3,000 submitted. She had earned her place here through documented precision that spoke louder than any recommendation letter ever could. The other candidates were already gathered near the administrative building when Sarah approached, and the contrast was immediately apparent. 11 men, most of them former military personnel with combat experience, stood in loose clusters sharing stories about previous deployments and advanced weapons training. Their conversation carried the easy camaraderie of people who had operated in similar environments, using terminology and references that created an invisible barrier around their group. Master Sergeant Jake Morrison had been running sniper training programs for 15 years, and he had developed very specific ideas about what made a successful long-range marksman. Physical strength mattered because military sniper rifles weighed 15 pounds before adding scopes and bipods. Mental toughness was essential because combat situations demanded split-second decisions under extreme stress. Most importantly, he believed that natural aggression and killer instinct separated the competent shooters from the elite ones. When Morrison reviewed the civilian applications that had been approved for his program, one file had immediately caught his attention for all the wrong reasons. Sarah Chun's shooting scores were undeniably impressive, but her background raised serious questions about her suitability for military-level training. She had never served in combat, never operated under hostile conditions, and never been required to make the kind of life-or-death decisions that defined real marksmanship in the field. Morrison called the 12 candidates to formation outside the main training facility, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to immediate obedience. The men arranged themselves in a perfect line with practiced efficiency, their posture reflecting years of military discipline. Sarah took her position at the end of the formation, maintaining the same rigid attention position despite having learned it from YouTube videos rather than drill instructors. "This program has a 92% failure rate," Morrison announced, his eyes scanning the group with calculated intensity. "Most of you will be gone within 2 weeks. The ones who remain will face 6 months of the most demanding marksmanship training in the world." He paused in front of each candidate, evaluating them with the practiced eye of someone who had seen hundreds of hopeful snipers come and go. When Morrison reached Sarah, his assessment was thorough and unmistakably skeptical. She stood 5 feet 4 inches tall and weighed perhaps 130 pounds. Her hands, while steady, lacked the calluses that came from years of handling heavy military equipment. Her civilian clothing, though appropriate for training, marked her as fundamentally different from the men who had arrived in combat boots and military-issued gear. "Chun," Morrison said, reading from his clipboard without looking up, "civilian instructor. No combat experience, no military training." He finally raised his eyes to meet hers. "What makes you think you belong here?" The question hung in the air like a challenge thrown down in front of witnesses. Sarah felt the weight of 11 pairs of eyes watching her response, measuring her reaction to the first test of many she would face. She had prepared for this moment during the long bus ride to Fort Braxton, knowing that her credentials would be questioned and her presence resented. "My shooting scores speak for themselves, Sergeant," Sarah replied, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. "I qualified for this program based on documented accuracy, not assumptions about what I might be capable of achieving." Morrison's expression shifted slightly, showing the first hint of surprise. Most civilian contractors showed immediate deference to military authority, but Sarah had responded with quiet confidence rather than nervous submission. He made a note on his clipboard and moved on to the next candidate, but not before glancing back at her with increased attention. The first week of training was designed to establish baseline capabilities and identify candidates who lacked the fundamental skills necessary for advanced instruction. Each day began with physical conditioning at dawn, followed by classroom instruction covering ballistics, wind reading, and range estimation. Afternoons were spent on the firing range, where candidates worked with standardized weapons to demonstrate basic marksmanship under controlled conditions. Sarah's performance during these initial assessments was consistently exceptional. Her shot groups at 300 yards were tighter than those of candidates with years of military experience. Her ability to calculate bullet drop and wind drift exceeded that of men who had been trained by professional instructors. Most impressively, her composure under pressure remained unshakable even when Morrison deliberately created distractions in stress situations designed to break concentration. But exceptional performance in a civilian shooting instructor was somehow viewed differently than the same level of skill demonstrated by former military personnel. When Corporal Danny Walsh, a Marine with 2 combat deployments, placed a shot group within 2 inches at 300 yards, Morrison praised his consistency and combat-proven abilities. When Sarah achieved the same result with a 1-inch group, Morrison commented that civilian target shooting was fundamentally different from military applications. The other candidates had formed their own opinions about Sarah's presence in the program. Staff Sergeant Mike Torres, who had served 3 tours in Afghanistan, openly questioned whether the training slots should be reserved for personnel with combat experience. "This isn't a hunting competition," he told the group during one evening. "Meal, when you're calling shots in hostile territory, you're not aiming at paper targets that don't shoot back." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Private First Class Kevin Adams, the youngest member of the group, had been more direct in his assessment. "She's probably a decent shot at her local range," he said loud enough for Sarah to hear. "But military sniping requires a different kind of mindset. You need to be comfortable with taking human life, not just hitting bullseyes." The comments weren't necessarily intended as personal attacks, but they reflected a fundamental assumption that Sarah's civilian background made her entirely unsuitable for military-level training. The men had convinced themselves that her shooting ability, however impressive, was irrelevant because she lacked the psychological preparation necessary for combat applications. Sarah listened to these conversations without responding, focusing instead on her own preparation and performance. She had encountered similar attitudes throughout her career as a civilian instructor, where her expertise was often dismissed because she didn't fit traditional expectations about what a marksmanship expert should look like. She had learned that arguing with preconceived notions was less effective than simply demonstrating superior capability. During the second week of training, Morrison introduced advanced shooting positions and longer-range targets. Candidates were required to engage stationary targets at distances up to 600 yards using military specification rifles with variable power scopes. The increased difficulty separated the competent shooters from the truly skilled ones. and several candidates began showing signs of stress as their performance declined. Sarah's accuracy at extended range was remarkable even by military standards. While other candidates struggled with the additional variables introduced by longer distances, she consistently placed shots within the required scoring zones. Her ability to read wind patterns and adjust for atmospheric conditions exceeded that of most military snipers with years of field experience. Morrison watched her performance with growing interest, though he maintained his skeptical demeanor during interactions with the group. Sarah's technical knowledge was undeniable, but he remained convinced that civilian shooting experience was inadequate preparation for the psychological demands of military marksmanship. Combat sniping required the ability to take human life from extreme distances, a mental barrier that many technically skilled shooters could never overcome. The third week brought the first major elimination challenge. Candidates were required to engage multiple targets at varying distances under time pressure, simulating the kind of rapid target acquisition necessary in combat situations. The course was designed to test both shooting accuracy and decision-making. Ability under stress, with penalty points assessed for missed shots and excessive time delays. 8 candidates successfully completed the challenge within the required parameters. 3 failed to meet the minimum accuracy standards and were eliminated from the program. Sarah not only completed the course successfully, but achieved the highest overall score, hitting all assigned targets with precision that impressed even Morrison's experienced range instructors. But instead of acknowledging her superior performance, Morrison focused on what he perceived as her limitations. Technical accuracy is only one component of military marksmanship, he announced to the remaining candidates. Combat situations require split-second decisions about target priority, collateral damage assessment, and mission-critical timing. These are skills that can only be developed through actual field experience. His words carried an implicit message that Sarah's civilian background would ultimately prove inadequate for the challenges ahead. The remaining candidates, emboldened by Morrison's apparent dismissal of her achievements, became more vocal in their skepticism about her suitability for military training. Torres started referring to her as the target shooter in conversations with other candidates, a nickname that emphasized her civilian background while diminishing her demonstrated capabilities. Adams openly questioned whether she would be capable of handling the psychological stress of engaging human targets, suggesting that her accuracy was meaningless without the mental toughness required for combat applications. The hostility wasn't overtly aggressive, but it created an atmosphere of isolation that made Sarah's position in the program increasingly uncomfortable. She found herself excluded from the informal conversations that built camaraderie among the other candidates, treated as a curiosity rather than a peer despite her superior performance on every measurable assessment. Morrison seemed to encourage this dynamic through his own behavior. While he praised the other candidates for marginal improvements in their shooting, he held Sarah to impossibly high standards and dismissed her achievements as irrelevant to military applications. When she achieved perfect scores on written examinations, covering ballistics and tactical procedures, he commented that theoretical knowledge was no substitute for practical experience. The psychological pressure was deliberate and calculated. Morrison had seen many technically skilled shooters fail when confronted with the mental demands of military sniping, and he was convinced that Sarah's civilian background made her particularly vulnerable to this kind of failure. He increased the pressure systematically, hoping to identify her breaking point before she reached the more advanced stages of training. But Sarah's response to the hostility was not what Morrison expected. Instead of becoming defensive or emotional, she withdrew into focused preparation that bordered on obsession. She spent her evenings studying advanced ballistics texts, memorizing atmospheric correction tables, and practicing mental exercises designed to improve concentration under stress. Her shooting performance, already exceptional, became even more precise as she channeled her frustration into technical improvement. The fourth week of training introduced the concept of stalking, the art of approaching targets undetected across open terrain. Candidates were required to move from concealed positions to firing locations, while avoiding detection by experienced observers equipped with binoculars and spotting scopes. The exercise tested camouflage skills, patience, and the ability to remain motionless for extended periods while maintaining shooting readiness. Sarah's performance during stalking exercises was remarkable. Her small size, which had been viewed as a disadvantage in previous training, became an asset when concealment and stealth were required. She could disappear into vegetation that barely concealed the larger candidates, moving with patience and precision that allowed her to reach firing positions undetected while others were spotted and eliminated. But even her superior performance in stalking was dismissed by Morrison as less relevant than combat experience. Hunting skills don't translate directly to military applications, he told the group after Sarah had successfully completed a particularly challenging exercise. Combat environments require different kinds of awareness and threat assessment that can only be developed through actual hostile encounters. The pattern continued through each successive week of training. Sarah consistently outperformed her fellow candidates in every measurable category, from shooting accuracy to tactical knowledge to physical endurance. Her ability to absorb and apply complex technical information exceeded that of men with years of military training. Yet her achievements were consistently minimized or dismissed as irrelevant to the real demands of military sniping. By the end of the first month, 5 candidates had been eliminated from the program due to insufficient performance. The remaining 7 had developed into a tight group that shared training experiences and supported each other through the increasing challenges. Sarah remained isolated from this camaraderie, her exceptional performance creating resentment rather than respect among her peers. Morrison's attitude toward her had evolved from skepticism to open hostility. He had expected her to fail or quit when confronted with the psychological pressure of military training, but her persistence and continued excellence had become a source of frustration. Her presence in the program challenged his fundamental assumptions about what made a successful military sniper, forcing him to confront the possibility that his traditional criteria might be incomplete or incorrect. The situation reached a critical point during the 6th week when Morrison announced the first elimination challenge involving moving targets. This exercise would test the candidate's ability to track and engage targets that moved unpredictably across the firing range, simulating the kind of dynamic shooting situations encountered in combat environments. The moving target challenge was considered the most difficult test in the entire program. Candidates would be required to engage targets at distances exceeding 800 yards while the targets moved at varying speeds and directions. The difficulty was compounded by environmental factors including wind, mirage, and time pressure that made accurate shooting extremely challenging, even for experienced military snipers. Morrison gathered the remaining candidates around a table, covered with range charts and target specifications. "This is where we separate the real snipers from the target shooters," he announced, his eyes focusing deliberately on Sarah. Moving targets require a completely different skill set than stationary precision shooting. You need to predict movement, lead your shots, and maintain accuracy under dynamic conditions that change every second. The implication was clear. Morrison expected Sarah to fail this challenge, and he wanted the other candidates to understand that her previous success with stationary targets was irrelevant to the more demanding requirements of military marksmanship. The moving target exercise would finally expose the limitations of her civilian background and justify his skepticism about her suitability for the program. Sarah listened to the briefing with the same quiet attention she had maintained throughout the training program. She had anticipated this moment for weeks, knowing that Morrison was determined to find a challenge that would demonstrate her inadequacy. The moving target exercise represented her opportunity to either prove her capabilities definitively or validate his assumption that civilian shooting experience was insufficient for military applications. That evening, as the other candidates discussed strategies for the upcoming challenge, Sarah remained in her quarters reviewing everything she had learned about ballistics, wind reading, and target tracking. She had spent years perfecting her ability to predict and compensate for the variables that affected long-range accuracy, but she had never faced a challenge of this magnitude under such hostile conditions. The next morning would determine whether months of preparation and exceptional performance had earned her the right to continue in the program, or whether Morrison's preconceptions about civilian capabilities would finally be validated by her failure. Sarah fell asleep clutching her grandfather's photograph, remembering the patient lessons he had taught her about shooting, persistence, and never allowing other people's limitations to define her own potential. The stage was set for a confrontation that would determine not just Sarah's future in the program, but the validity of assumptions that had shaped military sniper training for decades. Morrison was confident that his experience and traditional methods would be vindicated by Sarah's failure. Sarah was equally determined to prove that exceptional capability transcended conventional expectations about who belonged in elite military training. Neither of them anticipated how completely the next day would change everything they thought they knew about precision shooting, mental toughness, and the true nature of military marksmanship excellence. The announcement of the moving target challenge sent ripples of tension through the remaining candidates, but none felt the pressure more acutely than Sarah Chun, while her fellow trainees gathered in small groups to discuss strategy and share war stories about similar challenges they had faced during their military careers. Sarah found herself once again on the outside looking in. The isolation that had defined her experience at Fort Braxton was about to reach its crescendo, and she knew that failure in this exercise would not only end her participation in the program, but also validate every skeptical comment and dismissive gesture she had endured over the past 6 weeks. Morrison had made no effort to conceal his expectations for the upcoming challenge. During the evening briefing, he had outlined the specific requirements with particular emphasis on the psychological demands of engaging moving targets. Static shooting is one thing, he had explained to the group, his eyes lingering meaningfully on Sarah. But when your target is moving unpredictably at extreme range, you're dealing with variables that require instinctive responses developed through years of field experience. This isn't something you can learn from textbooks or practice on civilian ranges. The other candidates had nodded knowingly, their expressions conveying the shared understanding that comes from similar backgrounds in training. They had all engaged moving targets during their military service, whether in training exercises or actual combat situations. They possessed the kind of experiential knowledge that Morrison valued above all other qualifications, the hard-earned wisdom that came from making life-and-death decisions under extreme stress. Sarah returned to her quarters that evening with a heavy awareness of the odds stacked against her. She had excelled in every previous challenge through meticulous preparation and technical precision, but the moving target exercise would test capabilities that extended beyond pure marksmanship. She would need to predict movement patterns, calculate complex lead times, and maintain accuracy while dealing with multiple variables that changed continuously throughout the engagement sequence. Her small room in the trainee barracks contained few personal possessions, but every item had been carefully chosen for its relevance to her training objectives. Technical manuals covered ballistics calculations for moving targets, atmospheric effects on long-range trajectories, and psychological techniques for maintaining concentration under extreme pressure. Her laptop contained spreadsheets filled with data she had collected about wind patterns, temperature variations, and light conditions at the Fort Braxton range during different times of day. Sarah opened her most detailed notebook, filled with observations she had recorded during 6 weeks of training. She had documented Morrison's teaching methods, noting which techniques he emphasized and which approaches he seemed to favor when evaluating candidate performance. More importantly, she had studied the range itself with obsessive attention to detail, mapping wind patterns, identifying terrain features that affected bullet trajectory, and timing the atmospheric conditions that created optimal shooting environments. The moving target course had been described in general terms during the briefing, but Sarah knew that the specific details would be crucial to her success. The targets would move across the range at distances exceeding 800 yards, following patterns that simulated realistic combat scenarios. Candidates would have limited time to acquire, track, and engage each target while dealing with environmental conditions that could change dramatically throughout the exercise. Sarah pulled up a ballistics calculator on her laptop and began running theoretical scenarios based on the information Morrison had provided. If the targets moved at 15 miles per hour across her field of view at 800 yards, she would need to lead her shots by approximately 18 inches to compensate for the time her bullets spent in flight. But that calculation assumed perfect conditions with no wind, stable atmospheric pressure, and targets moving in straight lines at constant velocity. Real-world conditions would be far more complex. Wind would affect both horizontal and vertical bullet placement, requiring her to adjust her lead calculations based on crosswind components and updrafts created by terrain features. Target movement would likely include changes in speed and direction designed to maximize the difficulty of accurate tracking. Most challenging of all, she would need to make these calculations instinctively while under time pressure that prevented careful deliberation. Sarah spent the next 3 hours working through dozens of theoretical scenarios, calculating lead times for targets moving at different speeds and directions. She created reference cards with quick formulas for common situations, knowing that she would not have time for complex calculations during the actual exercise. Her preparation had to be so thorough that her responses became automatic, allowing her to focus on execution rather than computation when the pressure was at its highest. The physical demands of the challenge would be equally significant. Tracking moving targets at extreme range required steady positioning that could be maintained for extended periods without fatigue affecting accuracy. Sarah's smaller frame, which had been viewed as a disadvantage throughout the program, would actually provide some benefits in terms of stability and endurance. She could maintain shooting positions that would become uncomfortable for larger candidates over time. But physical capability would be meaningless without the mental toughness necessary to perform under the kind of scrutiny she would face during the exercise. Morrison and the other instructors would be watching her every move, looking for signs of stress or hesitation that would justify their skepticism about civilian capabilities. The other candidates would be hoping for her failure, eager to see their assumptions about military superiority validated by her poor performance. Sarah closed her technical manuals and focused on mental preparation techniques she had developed during years of competitive shooting. Visualization exercises allowed her to rehearse the challenge mentally, imagining herself successfully tracking and engaging targets, while maintaining the calm focus necessary for precision shooting. She practiced breathing techniques that would help her manage stress and maintain steady aim, even when her heart rate increased due to external pressure. The next morning arrived with the kind of crisp clarity that serious marksmen appreciated. Atmospheric conditions were nearly perfect, with minimal wind and excellent visibility that would allow candidates to clearly observe their targets at maximum range. Sarah arrived at the range early, hoping to study the terrain and wind patterns one final time before the exercise began. Morrison was already present, working with range technicians to calibrate the moving target systems and verify that all safety protocols were properly implemented. The targets themselves were life-size silhouettes mounted on motorized tracks that could move at variable speeds across predetermined courses. The entire system was controlled by computer programs. That could create unpredictable movement patterns designed to challenge even the most experienced marksmen. The other candidates arrived in small groups. Their conversations focused on equipment selection and shooting strategies they had used successfully in similar situations. Sarah listened carefully to their discussions, gathering intelligence about techniques and approaches that might be relevant to her own performance. Despite their hostility toward her presence in the program, their military experience provided valuable insights about combat marksmanship that her civilian background had not included. Staff Sergeant Torres was explaining his preferred method for tracking fast-moving targets to the group when Sarah approached within hearing distance. "The key is getting ahead of the target early and staying there," he said, demonstrating his technique with hand gestures. "You can't chase a moving target with your scope and expect to catch up. You have to predict where it's going and be waiting there when it arrives." Private Adams nodded in agreement, adding his own perspective based on urban combat experience. "Target movement in real situations is never smooth or predictable," he continued. "They speed up, slow down, change direction, duck behind cover. You have to be ready to adjust your lead constantly while maintaining sight picture and trigger control." Their conversation provided useful tactical information, but Sarah noted the underlying assumption that she lacked the combat experience necessary to apply these techniques effectively. They were sharing knowledge among themselves while excluding her from the discussion, maintaining the social isolation that had characterized her entire experience at Fort Braxton. Morrison called the candidates to formation and began the final briefing for the moving target challenge. Each candidate would engage a series of targets at distances ranging from 600 to 1,000 yards, with target movement patterns becoming progressively more complex throughout the exercise. Scoring would be based on accuracy, with bonus points awarded for shots that struck targets during periods of maximum movement difficulty. "This exercise has ended more military sniper careers than any other challenge in our program," Morrison announced, his tone carrying the gravity of someone who had witnessed many failures over the years. "Moving targets expose every weakness in your shooting fundamentals, every gap in your training, every limitation in your mental preparation. There's nowhere to hide when your target is moving unpredictably at extreme range." The first candidate to attempt the challenge was Sergeant First Class Robert Hayes, a Marine with extensive combat experience who had consistently performed well throughout the training program. Hayes approached his firing position with confident efficiency, adjusting his rifle rest and scope settings with practiced movements that reflected years of similar challenges. Sarah watched carefully as Hayes engaged his first target, a silhouette moving laterally across the range at approximately 800 yards. His first shot missed slightly behind the target, indicating that his lead calculation had been insufficient for the target's actual speed. Hayes made a quick adjustment and placed his second shot closer to the target, though still not achieving the center mass hit required for maximum points. The exercise continued with Hayes engaging multiple targets at varying distances and movement patterns. His overall performance was competent but not exceptional, with several near misses that demonstrated the extreme difficulty of maintaining accuracy against moving targets at extended range. When Hayes completed his sequence, Morrison nodded approvingly and made notes on his evaluation sheet. "Solid performance," Morrison commented loud enough for the other candidates to hear. Hayes demonstrated the kind of tactical awareness and adaptability that comes from real-world experience. His ability to adjust and improve throughout the exercise shows the mental toughness we're looking for in military snipers. Several candidates attempted the challenge with varying degrees of success. Some performed well on easier targets, but struggled when movement patterns became more complex. Others showed good initial accuracy, but lost focus under the pressure of time limits and multiple target engagements. None achieved the level of performance that Morrison described as exceptional. Though all received constructive feedback, that emphasized their military backgrounds and potential for improvement. Sarah was scheduled to attempt the challenge last, a position that allowed her to observe every other candidate's performance while increasing the psychological pressure she would face during her own attempt. By the time her turn arrived, the other candidates had established a baseline level of performance that would serve as the standard against which her civilian shooting skills would be measured. Morrison approached Sarah's firing position with an expression that conveyed his expectation of imminent failure. "Chun," he said, consulting his clipboard with exaggerated formality, "your target sequence will include the most challenging movement patterns we have available. I want to see if civilian target shooting translates to military applications under maximum stress conditions." The statement was clearly intended to increase pressure and create doubt about her capabilities. Sarah nodded acknowledgement without verbal response, focusing her attention on equipment preparation and mental readiness techniques she had practiced countless times. Her rifle was a precision instrument that she had learned to operate with instinctive efficiency, every control and adjustment as familiar as her own heartbeat. Sarah settled into her shooting position with deliberate care, adjusting her rifle rest and scope settings according to the range and atmospheric conditions she had observed throughout the morning. Her breathing was controlled and steady, her heart rate elevated but manageable through the mental preparation techniques she had practiced extensively. The weight of 11 pairs of eyes watching her every move was significant, but she had learned to channel external pressure into increased focus rather than allowing it to become a distraction. Morrison activated the first target, and Sarah immediately began tracking its movement through her scope. The silhouette moved laterally across her field of view at what appeared to be approximately 12 miles per hour, requiring a lead calculation of roughly 15 inches at the 800-yard distance. She followed the target smoothly, allowing her crosshairs to settle into position ahead of its movement path. Her first shot surprised everyone present, including Sarah herself. The bullet struck the target center mass with precision that exceeded anything achieved by the previous candidates. The impact was clearly visible through spotting scopes, leaving no doubt about the accuracy of her shot placement. A moment of stunned silence followed as the observers processed what they had just witnessed. Morrison quickly activated the second target, this one moving at a different speed and direction to test Sarah's ability to adjust her technique for varying conditions. Sarah tracked this target with the same smooth precision, calculating the new lead time and executing her shot with confidence that bordered on casual indifference. Her second shot was equally accurate, striking the target with authority that silenced any remaining doubts about her capability. The exercise continued with increasingly difficult target sequences, each designed to expose limitations in shooting technique or mental preparation. Sarah engaged each target with methodical precision that seemed to improve rather than deteriorate. Under pressure, her movement tracking was flawless, her lead calculations accurate, and her shot execution consistent, despite the mounting complexity of the challenge. By the time Sarah engaged her sixth target, the atmosphere around the firing line had changed completely. The other candidates stood in absolute silence, watching through binoculars and spotting scopes as she delivered shot after shot with accuracy that exceeded anything they had achieved during their own attempts. Morrison's expression had evolved from confident expectation to growing concern as Sarah's performance continued to exceed all reasonable expectations. The final target in Sarah's sequence was programmed with the most challenging movement pattern available, including multiple direction changes and speed variations designed to confuse even the most experienced marksman. The target moved erratically across the range at nearly 1,000 yards, requiring split-second decisions about lead time and shot timing that tested every aspect of long-range marksmanship skill. Sarah tracked the target patiently, waiting for the optimal moment when its movement pattern would allow for the highest probability shot. Her crosshairs followed smoothly as the target accelerated, decelerated, and changed direction across her scope's field of view. When the perfect opportunity presented itself, she executed her shot with the same calm precision that had characterized her entire sequence. The bullet's impact was visible even at maximum range, striking the target with devastating accuracy that left no room for doubt about her capabilities. The shot was so precise that it would have been impressive against a stationary target, but achieving that level of accuracy against a moving target at 1,000 yards represented marksmanship of the highest possible caliber. Complete silence followed Sarah's final shot as the observers struggled to process what they had witnessed. Her performance had exceeded not just their expectations, but their understanding of what civilian shooting experience could produce under military conditions. Every assumption about the limitations of non-combat training had been systematically demolished by shooting that surpassed anything achieved by candidates with years of military experience. Morrison approached Sarah's position with an expression that mixed surprise, confusion, and grudging respect. His evaluation sheet contained notes that documented performance levels he had never observed during 15 years of conducting moving target exercises. Sarah had not simply passed the challenge. She had redefined what exceptional performance looked like under the most demanding conditions his program could provide. "Outstanding shooting," Morrison said quietly, his voice lacking the confident authority that had characterized his interactions with Sarah throughout the training program. "Your target tracking and lid calculations were textbook perfect. I've never seen civilian-trained marksmanship translate to military applications with that level of precision." The other candidates remained silent, their earlier confidence replaced by the uncomfortable realization that their assumptions about military superiority had been completely wrong. Sarah's performance had exposed the limitations of their own capabilities while demonstrating that exceptional shooting skill transcended the boundaries of military versus civilian training backgrounds. Sarah secured her rifle and gathered her equipment with the same methodical attention to detail that had characterized her preparation for the challenge. She offered no verbal response to Morrison's comments, no celebration of her achievement, no acknowledgement of the fundamental shift in dynamics that her performance had created. She had simply demonstrated what she was capable of accomplishing when given the opportunity to perform without artificial limitations or preconceived restrictions. The moving target challenge had been designed to expose Sarah's inadequacy and validate the skepticism that had surrounded her participation in the program from the beginning. Instead, it had revealed capabilities that exceeded those of every other candidate and forced everyone present to confront their own assumptions about what made a successful military marksman. As Sarah walked away from the firing line, her equipment bag slung over her shoulder and her grandfather's photograph secure in her pocket, she carried herself with the quiet satisfaction of someone who had proven a point that needed no verbal explanation. The challenge that was supposed to end her participation in the program had instead established her as the most capable marksman in the group. Morrison stood at the firing line for several minutes after the other candidates had departed, staring at the targets that documented Sarah's exceptional performance. His evaluation sheets contained scores that exceeded his previous experience, forcing him to question fundamental assumptions about military training that had guided his career for 15 years. The program would continue for several more weeks, but the dynamic had changed permanently. Sarah's demonstration of superior capability under maximum pressure had earned something more valuable than acceptance or approval. She had earned respect based on undeniable competence that transcended every artificial barrier that had been placed in her path. The evening mess hall was unusually quiet as the candidates processed the day's events. Conversations that had previously focused on Sarah's civilian background and questionable suitability for military training were replaced by respectful acknowledgement of capabilities that none of them could match. The isolation that had defined her experience at Fort Braxton was finally beginning to dissolve, replaced by the recognition that exceptional performance demanded regardless of its source. Sarah ate her dinner in the same quiet solitude that had characterized her entire experience at the academy, but the hostility that had surrounded her isolation was gone. She had proven everything that needed proving through the most demanding challenge the program could provide, and no amount of skepticism or prejudice could diminish the significance of what she had accomplished. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and continued training, but the fundamental question about Sarah's place in the program had been answered definitively. She belonged at Fort Braxton, not because anyone had granted her permission to be there, but because her capabilities exceeded those of every other candidate in measurable, undeniable ways. The moving target challenge had been intended as Sarah's moment of failure, the definitive proof that civilian shooting experience was inadequate for military applications. Instead, it had become her moment of triumph, the demonstration that separated exceptional capability from comfortable assumptions about what made a military marksman truly elite. Morrison returned to his office that evening with evaluation sheets that would force him to reconsider 15 years of experience about what made successful snipers. Sarah's performance had exceeded his understanding of what civilian training could produce, challenging everything he thought he knew about the relationship between military experience and marksmanship excellence. The other candidates spent the evening in quiet contemplation of their own limitations, confronted with evidence that their assumptions about military superiority had been fundamentally wrong. Sarah's demonstration had not been a lucky performance or exceptional day. It had been the logical result of preparation, dedication, and natural ability that transcended artificial boundaries between civilian and military training. As Sarah prepared for sleep in her small quarters, surrounded by the technical manuals and reference materials that had guided her preparation, she felt the satisfaction that came from meeting a challenge that others had expected to defeat her. The moving target exercise had been designed to expose her inadequacy, but it had instead revealed capabilities that exceeded every reasonable expectation. The program would continue for several more weeks, but Sarah's position was now secure. She had proven her worth through the most demanding test available, earning recognition that no amount of skepticism or prejudice could diminish. Her place at Fort Braxton was no longer a matter of debate, but a documented fact supported by performance that spoke for itself. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and continued opportunities to demonstrate the capabilities that had carried her through 6 weeks of systematic doubt and hostility. But the fundamental question about whether she belonged in military training had been answered with shooting that redefined what exceptional marksmanship looked like under the most demanding conditions available. The transformation began immediately following Sarah's extraordinary performance on the moving target challenge, but its full implications would not become apparent until the following morning when Morrison faced the uncomfortable task of documenting her achievement in official training records. Her scores on the exercise exceeded not only those of her fellow candidates, but also the performance benchmarks established by decorated military snipers with years of combat experience. The evaluation sheets on Morrison's desk contained numbers that challenged 15 years of assumptions about what civilian training could produce under military conditions. Morrison had built his reputation on identifying natural marksmen and developing their capabilities through rigorous training protocols that separated competent shooters from truly elite performers. His success rate was legendary within military sniper communities, with former students serving in special operations units around the world. But Sarah's performance had exceeded his understanding of what was possible without extensive combat experience, forcing him to confront the possibility that his traditional evaluation methods might be incomplete. The other candidates gathered for morning formation with subdued energy that reflected their processing of the previous day's events. The confident camaraderie that had characterized their interactions throughout the program was replaced by thoughtful silence as they struggled to reconcile their assumptions about military superiority with the undeniable evidence of Sarah's exceptional capabilities. Staff Sergeant Torres, who had coined the dismissive nickname Target Shooter, found himself unable to make eye contact with Sarah during the morning briefing. Private Adams, whose comments about psychological toughness and combat mindset had been particularly pointed throughout the training program, stood at rigid attention while avoiding any acknowledgement of Sarah's presence. His earlier confidence about the superiority of military training had been systematically demolished by shooting performance that exceeded anything he had achieved during years of active duty service. The morning briefing covered routine administrative matters and upcoming training schedules, but the atmosphere was charged with unspoken recognition of the fundamental shift that had occurred in group dynamics. Morrison's usual authoritative demeanor was replaced by careful professionalism that avoided any direct reference to the moving target challenge, while acknowledging its significance through subtle changes in his treatment of Sarah. "Chun," Morrison sighed, consulting his clipboard with new attention to detail. "Your performance yesterday demonstrates advanced marksmanship capabilities that warrant consideration for accelerated training opportunities. I'm recommending you for inclusion in the Advanced Target Interdiction course scheduled for next month." The announcement sent shockwaves through the assembled candidates. The Advanced Target Interdiction course was reserved for military snipers with proven combat effectiveness and exceptional shooting records. Civilian contractors were never considered for this level of training, which involved classified techniques and equipment used by special operations units in hostile environments. Sarah accepted the recommendation with the same quiet professionalism that had characterized her response to 6 weeks of skepticism and hostility. She offered no verbal reaction to Morrison's announcement, no acknowledgement of the significance of being selected for training that had previously been restricted to elite military personnel. Her composed response somehow made the moment even more powerful, demonstrating the confidence that came from knowing her capabilities were finally being recognized appropriately. The implications of Morrison's decision extended far beyond Sarah's individual advancement. By recommending her for advanced training traditionally reserved for combat veterans, he was acknowledging that her civilian background was irrelevant compared to her demonstrated capabilities. The recommendation represented a fundamental shift in military training philosophy that would have consequences throughout the sniper community. Following the morning briefing, Morrison requested a private meeting with Sarah in his office. The small room was filled with commendations, photographs, and mementos from 15 years of training elite marksmen, but Morrison's usual confidence was notably absent as he struggled to address the implications of Sarah's performance. "I owe you an apology," Morrison began, his voice lacking the authoritative tone that had characterized their previous interactions. "My evaluation of your capabilities was based on assumptions that proved to be completely wrong. Your performance yesterday exceeded that of candidates with extensive combat experience, and I failed to recognize your potential due to prejudices about civilian training." Sarah listened without interruption as Morrison continued his acknowledgement of the mistakes that had shaped her experience at Fort Braxton. His apology was thorough and genuine, reflecting the uncomfortable process of confronting long-held beliefs that had been proved incorrect by undeniable evidence. "Your shooting ability is exceptional by any standard," Morrison continued. "But more importantly, your mental toughness and preparation methods demonstrate the kind of professional approach that makes elite snipers effective in combat situations. I misjudged both your technical capabilities and your psychological readiness for military applications." The conversation that followed was unlike any interaction Sarah had experienced during her time at the academy. Morrison asked detailed questions about her training methods, preparation techniques, and mental approach to precision shooting. His interest was genuine and professional, focused on understanding how civilian instruction had produced capabilities that exceeded those of military-trained marksmen. Sarah explained her systematic approach to ballistic study, atmospheric condition analysis, and mental preparation techniques developed during years of competitive shooting. Her methods were more comprehensive and scientifically rigorous than many military training protocols, incorporating advanced mathematical calculations and psychological techniques that most combat snipers learn through trial and error over years of field experience. Morrison took extensive notes during their conversation, recognizing that Sarah's training methods contained valuable insights that could improve his own instruction techniques. Her civilian background, which he had viewed as a limitation, had actually provided her with analytical tools and preparation methods that enhanced rather than restricted her military applications. "I'd like your permission to incorporate some of your preparation techniques into our standard training curriculum," Morrison requested. "Your ballistics analysis methods and mental preparation protocols could benefit future candidates, regardless of their military backgrounds." The request represented a complete reversal of the dynamic that had characterized Sarah's experience at Fort Braxton. Morrison was now seeking to learn from techniques he had previously dismissed as irrelevant to military applications. Sarah agreed to share her methods, understanding that improving training protocols would benefit future candidates who might face similar skepticism about their backgrounds or capabilities. The conversation concluded with Morrison providing details about the advanced target interdiction course and the specialized training opportunities it would provide. The program included classified techniques used by special operations snipers, advanced equipment familiarization, and psychological preparation for high-stress combat environments. Sarah's acceptance into this program represented recognition at the highest levels of military marksmanship training. Word of Sarah's recommendation for advanced training spread quickly through the base, creating ripple effects that extended far beyond the immediate candidates in Morrison's program. Military instructors from other specialties began questioning their own assumptions about civilian capabilities, while administrative personnel processed the unprecedented situation of a civilian contractor being recommended for classified sniper training. The other candidates in Sarah's group struggled to adjust to the new dynamic created by Morrison's acknowledgement of her superior capabilities. Torres approached Sarah during the afternoon break, his earlier hostility replaced by grudging respect that reflected his processing of the previous day's events. "I owe you an apology," Torres said quietly, ensuring their conversation remained private. "My comments about target shooting and civilian limitations were out of line. Your performance yesterday was the best marksmanship I've ever witnessed under any conditions." Similar acknowledgments came from other candidates throughout the day as they individually recognized that their assumptions about Sarah's capabilities had been fundamentally wrong. Adams offered his own apology, admitting that his comments about psychological toughness had been based on prejudices rather than evidence. "I've served 3 combat tours, and I've never seen shooting like what you demonstrated yesterday," Adams said. "Your mental preparation and technical execution were flawless under pressure that would have affected most military snipers I've worked with. The transformation in group dynamics was remarkable and swift. The isolation that had characterized Sarah's experience for 6 weeks dissolved as her fellow candidates recognized her exceptional capabilities and began treating her as a peer rather than an outsider. Conversations that had previously excluded her now included requests for advice about shooting techniques and mental preparation methods. Sarah's response to these acknowledgments was gracious but reserved. She harbored no resentment toward candidates who had doubted her capabilities, understanding that their skepticism had been based on limited experience with civilian training rather than personal animosity. Her focus remained on continued improvement and preparation for the advanced training opportunities that lay ahead. The remaining weeks of the basic program proceeded with a completely different atmosphere than the first 6 weeks. Sarah's exceptional performance had earned respect that manifested in genuine camaraderie and mutual support among all candidates. The artificial barriers between military and civilian backgrounds had been eliminated by demonstrated competence that transcended traditional categories. Morrison's instruction methods evolved to incorporate techniques and approaches that Sarah had shared during their private conversation. His ballistics instruction became more mathematically rigorous, while his mental preparation protocols incorporated psychological techniques that Sarah had developed through years of competitive shooting. The entire program improved as a result of insights gained from someone whose civilian background had initially been viewed as a limitation. Sarah's final weeks at Fort Braxton were marked by continued exceptional performance across all training areas. Her shooting accuracy remained unmatched, but equally impressive was her development of leadership qualities as other candidates sought her guidance on technical and mental aspects of precision marksmanship. She had evolved from isolated outsider to acknowledged expert, whose opinions were sought and respected by both instructors and fellow students. The graduation ceremony for Morrison's sniper training program was held on a crisp morning that mirrored the atmospheric conditions during Sarah's moving target demonstration. 7 candidates had successfully completed the rigorous 6-month program, with Sarah achieving the highest overall scores in program history across all evaluated categories. Morrison addressed the graduating class with remarks that acknowledged the exceptional nature of their group and the lessons learned through challenging traditional assumptions about military training. His comments specifically recognized Sarah's achievements, while emphasizing the broader implications of her success for future training programs. This graduating class has demonstrated that exceptional marksmanship capability transcends traditional boundaries between military and civilian training backgrounds, Morrison announced. Excellence is defined by performance under pressure, not by the path that led to that capability. Sarah received her graduation certificate with the same quiet dignity that had characterized her response to skepticism and hostility throughout the program. Her achievement represented more than personal success. It had fundamentally changed how military sniper training would evaluate and develop candidates in the future. The Advanced Target Interdiction course began 3 weeks later at a classified facility where Sarah joined elite military snipers from special operations units around the world. Her civilian background made her unique among the participants, but her reputation from Fort Braxton had preceded her arrival. She was welcomed as a peer by operators whose combat experience was legendary within military communities. The advanced training introduced Sarah to techniques and equipment that pushed the boundaries of long-range marksmanship. Targets at distances exceeding 1,500 yards, adverse weather conditions, and complex tactical scenarios tested capabilities that went far beyond civilian shooting applications. Sarah's performance continued to exceed expectations, with shooting accuracy and tactical decision-making that impressed instructors with decades of special operations experience. Master Chief Petty Officer Robert Harrison, the senior instructor for the advanced program, had initially questioned the decision to include a civilian contractor in training designed for special operations personnel. Sarah's performance during the first week of training eliminated any doubts about her suitability for the program. Chun's marksmanship ability is exceptional by any standard, Harrison reported to program administrators. Her technical knowledge and mental preparation methods exceed those of most operators I've trained. She's earned her place in this program through demonstrated competence that speaks for itself. The advanced program concluded with Sarah achieving scores that placed her among the top performers in the course's history. Her civilian background, which had initially been viewed as a limitation, had actually provided her with analytical and preparation methods that enhanced her military applications. She had proven that exceptional capability could emerge from unconventional sources when given appropriate opportunities to develop. Following completion of the advanced training, Sarah was offered a position as a civilian contractor providing marksmanship instruction to special operations units. The role represented recognition at the highest levels of military sniper communities, with responsibilities that included developing training protocols and evaluating equipment for elite operators. Sarah accepted the position with the understanding that her success would create opportunities for future civilian contractors who might face similar skepticism about their capabilities. She had broken through barriers that had previously limited participation in military training programs, creating precedents that would benefit others who possessed exceptional abilities regardless of their backgrounds. 6 months after her graduation from Fort Braxton, Sarah returned to the academy as a guest instructor for Morrison's advanced marksmanship course. The irony was not lost on anyone present that the woman who had been systematically doubted and dismissed was now teaching techniques to military snipers eager to learn from her expertise. Her instruction session focused on mathematical approaches to ballistics calculation and mental preparation techniques that had enabled her exceptional performance under pressure. The candidates listened with rapt attention as Sarah explained methods that could improve their accuracy and consistency in challenging conditions. Morrison introduced Sarah to the new class with comments that acknowledged both her achievements and the broader lessons learned from her success. Chun represents what's possible when exceptional capability is allowed to develop without artificial limitations, he told the assembled candidates. Her civilian background didn't limit her potential. It provided different preparation methods that enhanced her military applications. The introduction reflected a complete transformation in Morrison's understanding of what made successful military snipers. Sarah's success had forced him to recognize that excellence could emerge from unconventional sources when traditional barriers were removed and performance was evaluated objectively. During her instruction session, Sarah was approached by several candidates who shared their own experiences with skepticism and doubt, based on backgrounds that differed from traditional military patterns. Some were women facing gender-based assumptions about their capabilities, while others came from technical specialties that were viewed as less relevant to combat applications. Sarah's advice to these candidates was consistent with the approach that had enabled her own success. Focus on demonstrated competence rather than convincing people that you belong, she told them. Exceptional performance speaks louder than any argument about your qualifications or background. Her words carried the authority that came from personal experience, overcoming systematic doubt through undeniable achievement. Sarah had proven that barriers based on assumptions rather than evidence could be overcome by those willing to exceed expectations through preparation and performance. The impact of Sarah's success extended throughout military sniper communities as word spread about her exceptional achievements and the lessons learned from her experience. Training programs began reevaluating their selection criteria and instruction methods, recognizing that valuable capabilities might be overlooked due to prejudices about appropriate backgrounds for military applications. Several other civilian contractors with exceptional shooting abilities were accepted into military training programs following precedents established by Sarah's success. These individuals brought diverse perspectives and innovative techniques that enriched military training while proving that exceptional capability transcended traditional boundaries between civilian and military expertise. Sarah's influence on military marksmanship training became permanent as her analytical methods and preparation techniques were incorporated into standard instruction protocols. Her civilian background, initially viewed as a limitation, had actually provided insights that improved training effectiveness for all participants, regardless of their military experience. Years later, when military historians documented the evolution of sniper training programs, Sarah's achievement at Fort Braxton was recognized as a turning point that challenged fundamental assumptions about what made effective military marksmen. Her success had proven that excellence was defined by performance under pressure rather than conformity to traditional expectations about appropriate backgrounds. The moving target challenge that was designed to expose Sarah's inadequacy had instead revealed capabilities that exceeded those of experienced military snipers. Her achievement had forced uncomfortable recognition that assumptions about civilian limitations were based on prejudice rather than evidence, creating opportunities for exceptional individuals regardless of their backgrounds. Morrison continued to reference Sarah's success in his instruction of future classes, using her example to challenge candidates' assumptions about their own limitations and potential. Her achievement had become a permanent part of Fort Braxton's training legacy, inspiring future marksmen to exceed expectations, while proving that barriers existed primarily in minds that refused to acknowledge evidence. Sarah's journey from isolated outsider to acknowledged expert had transformed not only her own opportunities, but also the entire approach to evaluating and developing marksmanship capability within military communities. She had proven that exceptional performance could emerge from unconventional sources when given appropriate opportunities to demonstrate and develop. The skepticism and hostility that had characterized her early experience at Fort Braxton seemed impossible to imagine when considering her current reputation within military sniper communities. Sarah had earned recognition based on demonstrated competence that no amount of prejudice could diminish, establishing precedents that would benefit future generations of marksmen, regardless of their backgrounds. Her success story had become legendary within military circles, not just for the exceptional shooting performance that had silenced her critics, but for the broader lessons about recognizing and developing talent wherever it might be found. Sarah had proven that excellence transcended artificial boundaries, creating opportunities for exceptional individuals who might otherwise be overlooked due to assumptions about appropriate qualifications. The woman who had arrived at Fort Braxton as a dismissed outsider had departed as an acknowledged expert whose influence would shape military training for years to come. Sarah's achievement represented more than personal success. It had fundamentally changed how military communities evaluated potential and developed exceptional capability regardless of its source. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.